Hello, and welcome to Confidently Compliant, a food safety podcast. I'm your host, Paula Parejo, and I'm from the BRCGS Americas team. For those of you who don't know BRCGS, we are a GFSI benchmark certification program owner, and we have everything from food safety to storage and distribution to plant-based, gluten-free consumer products, and ethical. Today we're going to be talking about ethical trade and responsible sourcing, and we'll take a deeper look at the meaning behind these principles and management systems needed to support them. Today, I have with me Michael Wilson, who is the global head of ethical trade and responsible sourcing. And we're going to be talking about why care about ethics and answering that question. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm very excited to be sitting here with you today, Mike. This is a topic that's very true to my heart. Ethical trade and responsible sourcing is certainly not a new topic that we're talking about in the supply chain. However, the way that we measure ethics is changing. And I think it's important to understand how your business decisions are impacting the global supply chain and the ethics surrounding it. So before we get into any detail, can you tell me a bit about your background and how you got involved in this line of work and how you got here today?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much, Paula. So I'm originally from South Africa, and I think if I had my own way, I'd be a farmer. I think that's how I see myself. I grew up fascinated by farming, by primary production. I grew up with a best friend who was a farmer, so I spent a lot of time on the farm and in the production of primarily fruit. Which was destined for the export market, and I found that whole thing fascinating. And it was at that time that I started becoming really interested in the supply chain, the value chain of how it gets from the farm where it's produced to the point of sale where the consumer buys the product. And I kind of moved out of the primary production sphere and worked as a technical manager for an import company in the UK. Again, primarily to learn about that commercial transaction that takes place at the top of the value chain.
Yep.
What was really fascinating for me, though, is the requirements, the demand that is at the top of the supply chain. I mean, the consumers are really, really demanding in some parts of the world.
You don't say.
They want perfection. There can't be a blemish. And for me, what was really interesting is we're dealing with a natural product. So the effort, the time, the expense, the manpower that it takes to kind of present the perfect apple.
Yeah.
And there was a mismatch between the value that the apple would receive at the point of sale and sort of the value that it took to get it there. I transitioned from that post as a technical manager, and I became involved in certification.
Okay.
And my job at the time was to work with farms around the world and start bringing them to a point where these sorts of standards became second nature. And again, it was really interesting for me because there was this message coming out of the retailer, the point of sale, and it wasn't the same as the message that was being received by the producer at the bottom end of the value chain. And there was this whole lost in translation thing going in. And the perception from the producer's point of view was that this is an external standard that's being imposed on me. You're telling me what you want me to do for your product. And that's kind of how they treated it. But when you actually sat down with the content and you looked at what the requirements were addressing, it's all just good business sense. We talked in the farming world, we talked about integrated pest management and integrated management principles at farm level. And the saying there is as much as is necessary, but as little as possible. And isn't that where we're at in the world now in terms of sustainability? We've got to do more with less. We've got more mouths to feed, less land to grow the product on. So it's about doing more with less, as much as necessary, but as little as possible. I started my own business in South Africa, doing the farm side of the auditing, and I was approached by two very big customers in South Africa who were grappling with the ethical trade thing. This is back in the early 2000s when it was starting to become a thing, particularly in South Africa. And these customers contacted me and said, "Look, could you have a look at this for us and help us out with it?" And my first response was, "No ways, I'm not interested. This is something that's it's kind of like I don't know what it was, but it's not hard and fast. It's not technical. It's not black or white. There's this sort of morass of grey when it comes to the ethical trade world, because it's about people. It's
Yeah,
not
it's
about
humans.
product. It is.
Yeah.
And that kind of freaked me out a little bit. But then
Yeah.
I started doing some research, and it was exactly the same as the farming standard when I looked at it. It's good common sense. Treat people the way you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the long and the short of it. So I took I guess you could call it a leap of faith in a way. But I changed the direction of travel from being about technical and product safety into the world of ethics primarily, but then increasingly sustainability, and then we start talking about the resilience of the supply chain.
Yeah.
And I've spent the last, I guess, sort of 15 years really kind of learning, and every day for me I learn something new. It's an amazing space to be in. And yeah, I was approached by BRCGS a couple of years ago, and they had asked me to come and talk to them about this whole thing. I think they were as scared as I was originally when I first heard about it. So yeah. we had a chat, and there was a great compatibility between what my vision of the standard was,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of the trajectory that the BRCGS business was on. And you know, we made the decision as a business to take this forward, and we very much see it as a huge strategic fit with all of our product safety standards, because for us,
Mm-hmm.
there are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
You know, increasingly we've always spoken about product safety, quality, safety, legality.
Yeah.
Increasingly we're shifting across to provenance. Where does it come from? How was it made? Who made it? What was the environment like in which it was made? And consumers are starting to catch on to this as well. So for us as a brand reputation and compliance business, this is bang on strategy.
I'm so curious. What kind of farming did your friend do that got you so into it?
Bananas.
Bananas. Sorry, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, I know. It was bananas, sugarcane, and then more recently macadamia nuts. Do you know what macadamia nuts are?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, brilliant. Not many people do.
Really?
Yeah. No. Yeah. So we
it's like in all
grew up.
of
Yeah,
the
grew up
favorite
on
treats.
Yeah.
There's so many treats with macadamia nuts.
Yeah,
That's so
absolutely.
fun. I'm sorry. I grew up in a farming area, and when you ask someone like, oh, what kind of farming do, you typically hear like, cattle, chickens,
not bananas.
Not bananas. Okay. I'll come back now. So, Mike, I hope you take this as a compliment. But if I were a listener and I came across this podcast, I must say I'm a little bit relieved that you are from South Africa. Talking about this, and you're the person behind this standard, because as much as I mean no disrespect, but as much as us as Westerners believe that we understand all the issues, we don't necessarily. We're not there living everything that what we do impacts another part of the world. So I think it's really great that you are taking a real life perspective into the standard.
Oh, thank you. So, well, I mean, it is a compliment, and just for the record, I had a very small part to play in the development of the standard. We had a really, really active working group that helped, which I think is part of the reason why it's so important. But yeah, the point you make is very well made, and I think it's possibly because of the way that products are marketed now, because of the, if I can call it, the consumerist nature of people nowadays. I want it all and I want it now. And over time, certainly the amount of thought into what am I buying and where does it come from has increased. And I think as the generational cohort moves from Gen X to millennials, we've definitely seen a shift in the way that consumers buy, their buying behavior, and what they're expecting from the products that they buy.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's reverberating. So that's having a knock-on effect back to the point of production.
Yeah.
And it's you're starting to look down a tube of transparency that says, well, I've now bought this product from a big retailer in Canada or the US or the UK or wherever. I want to know where it came from.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still find myself almost in a translation role, where you're taking the message of the consumer, and that could be through the viewpoint of a retailer or a large brand, and you're translating it into a language that it's the same message, but you're translating into a message that makes sense now to the primary producer. And culture plays a huge role in everything we do as human beings. It affects the way we interact with one another. It's a measure of our communication with each other. And that's probably why I found it perhaps a little bit easier being from South Africa and working across the African continent. I find it a bit easier perhaps to kind of understand what was wanted, because I'd spent time learning about it in the marketplace. And then sort of translating it into an accessible format that the people on the production end understood, because I'd spent time there as well. But I think the important thing is to always make sure that the message stays the same, so that you're not getting it lost in translation.
Absolutely. And being a person from the Western world as well, like, I think there's two other elements that you kind of brought up that stood out to me. I think as a consumer basis now, we are a lot more educated in where we're buying from. It wasn't always the case, though, right? I think that a lot of it came from not knowing how things were being produced to get mass production, for it to be all filled with plastic, for it to be super cheap and whatever. And then as we grew as consumers and became more aware of the world issues and the way that just the information era in general really taught us how to be more educated in these things. So that really made a movement in that way. But also on the other hand, I think that there's a lot more entrepreneurs now than there used to be. So I think that there's a bit of like two sides there, because you have the consumer who's much more educated in that, but then you have all these like new entrepreneurs who it's like, oh my gosh, this is such an overwhelming world. Like, how do I even make ends meet? How do I get started? So I think it's really great to have something like this to kind of guide us of, let's meet what the consumers want and make it reasonable for you to do.
I think it's you can't underestimate the impact that globalization has had on the world that we live in. Right from the mass casualization of labor around the world, where you've moved from employing people to kind of picking and choosing when you want and who you want and how you want, and that creates vulnerability in itself. The converse of that, sort of in mitigation of that to a degree, is the expansion and the reach of social media. And access to information and sort of the ubiquity, if I can call it that, of data, where I can get anything I want, get any question I want answered, by putting in the search engine and asking the question. And that's had a massive impact on the way that goods are transacted across the world, because it's that supply chain is no longer as vague and opaque as it used to be. It's not sort of, where did this banana come from? I have no idea, but I don't care because it's cheap.
Right.
No, I want some sort of assurance behind that product. I want to know that, if maybe it's not necessary for me to know that I'm doing good with my purchase. But I at least want to know that I'm not doing any bad, or I'm not supporting any bad practices further down the supply chain. And this is kind of what's driving consumer behavior in today's world. Brands, retailers, everybody's got to catch a wake up and sort of, respond to that need.
Absolutely.
And you do need guidelines on how to do that, and that's the role that we play as an organization. Is we draw the chalk lines on the sports field and say, listen, you got to play within those lines. Outside of that, there's a consequence. Inside of that, everything's cool, and we have to agree what those chalk lines are. What does at least minimum look like? Not necessarily good at this stage.
Sure.
And that's where we get the requirements of compliance from.
Absolutely. Like, again, I think it's really comforting to know someone who has like a world view, how to draw those lines again, as you mentioned. And as well, like, in terms of us being in an information world now, there's so much noise around us. So when you're thinking about reporters and things, they're looking for like, what's going to be that next story that's going to blow out the headlines. So you got to be careful too. I would hate, like, anyone would hate to be that brand owner who finds out, oh my goodness, like, the supply chain I've been working with have been doing unethical things, and now my brand is associated with that.
I must say, the certainly the brands and the retailers that we work very closely with are they've responded really well, and they recognize this for what it is. This is not going to solve the world's problems.
Sure.
But what it does help to do is it helps to bring an element of clarity to what's going on. So that I can start, sorting the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and saying, well, how do I know? I know if the product's safe and legal because I can test it, but how do I know about the ethics behind the product? And so you can start bringing a level of clarity to that. And it's not easy. And, the job doesn't end yet. It starts here. But we start be able to create some metrics within which we can go out there and measure what's going on.
So the term sustainable is a big buzzword in business right now, particularly in the consumer product sector.
Yeah.
So how would you define sustainability? I know that's a very loaded question.
Nice short questions, I think the first point I want to make is that sustainability, there's three legs to sustainability, and I think they're all equal, and we have to think of sustainability in terms of people, profit, and planet.
So it's a stool.
It's a stool, and you've got to understand that each of those are as important as the other. And I think that's possibly where we have gone wrong in the past.
Okay.
Is we've over prioritized one of those. So we may have kind of really focused on profitability, and we may have sort of driven cost out of the business and really focused and honed in on making as much money as we can. Possibly at the expense of either the environment that we work in or the people that we're working with.
Yep.
And I think the nature of the world that we're in now, with the level of competition that's there and the sort of the scrutiny that brand owners and retailers are under, it's now about bringing that into balance again and sort of saying, well, we have to focus on people. We've got to look after the planet.
Yeah.
And almost profitability is an indicator of how well we're doing those two things, as opposed to profitability being the indicator that we focus on.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting for a second that corporates out there are going to suddenly start binning their audited financial statements and looking at the people reports or the planet reports, but I do think that we have to start bringing those two legs of that stool up into that realm so that we can start focusing on them. A lot of the standards that we work with, a lot of it focuses very heavily on the product.
Yes.
So it looks at the physical aspects of the product. I'm saying we need to go beyond the physical boundaries of the product and look behind it and say, that's what will draw the customer in to buy the goods. What's going to keep them buying it? Or even worse, what's going to not stop them from coming in and buying it? And that's that non-physical realm that we start talking about in ethical trade and responsible sourcing.
Okay. No, that does make sense to me. It's interesting to see it in that perspective. I never would have thought that was the exact definition of sustainability because you hear it so much. I think a lot of people really confuse what that could look like.
I think the reality is if you put 5 people in a room and ask them to define sustainability, you'll get 15 different definitions.
I think so. I went to a conference like a couple months ago, and it was interesting to see a panel of people talking about what sustainability looked like.
Yeah.
One person had spoken up and said, actually, I don't believe that my company's sustainable. I believe it's ethical. She said, there's so much more we have to do for sustainability. Because, again, like you said, depending on who you're asking, sustainability sometimes is talking about the environmental impact or the social impact or the financial, but they never, I don't find one person ever says all three. So
and it changes as well. It changes as sort of, the some people will say sustainability is about the environment. So when you look at some products are labeled sustainably sourced or produced or whatever the case may be, and that from their perspective, that might mean it's done in a way that's not harmful to the environment or restores the environment or some, quite an environmental focus.
Yeah.
And they almost look at ethical and sustainability as two different things. Ethical is the people, sustainability is the planet, and that's fine. I mean, we don't really it doesn't really matter how we get to the destination, but it's all about making sure that we're all heading in the same direction.
Yeah.
And focusing on what we need to focus on.
Do you think it really matters of what that definition is, so long as we're all on the same kind of playing field, or does the standard kind of help with that?
Look, I think it's a difficult one to answer. I think we have to. Everyone has to have a vision, and they have to have when you start a journey, you have to have a destination, right?
Yes.
You have to say, listen, I'm going from point A to point B. You can't just jump in your vehicle and say, right, I'm going somewhere, because you'll end up nowhere. So for me, the destination is important.
Yeah.
I think what the standard does is the standard helps elaborate on the journey, the process of getting to the destination.
Yeah.
So when you say, I've now decided that I need to get from where I am to point B, you've now got a whole range of choices in terms of how you can make that journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what the standard starts helping you do is it starts helping you make decisions in terms of the best way to get to the destination. And what it does then is it's a waypoint along the road. So when the auditor comes to check, they're effectively saying, are you on the right track? Are you going to get to your destination or not? And it should be a positive thing. It should be about helping an organization to make sure they're on track to get to the destination. And by the way, I think the other thing I must point out is that with sustainability, because there is increasing pressure on non-renewable resource, that destination is always changing. So we've got to make sure that all of our systems, the way we work, the way we think, it's all about progress, not perfection. It's about continuous improvement and saying, I know that when I get to my goal, my water saving goal, I know that in 5 years' time, there's going to be different pressures on the environment, and my water saving goal might be further back again. So I'll need to relook at it like that. Yeah, but I do think that you do have to start with something.
Well, that is logical. Like business changes, right? Like it's a continuous changing cycle. Yeah. Like what you learned 10 years ago isn't always relevant to today. So
absolutely,
that's completely logical. How do you define ethical trade? Simple.
Do the right thing. Do the right thing. That's it. Even when no one's looking. So it's a cultural thing. It's the organization's DNA. It has to almost, set itself up to be able to do that.
Yeah.
What is the right thing? Well, it's legal compliance to start with as a basis for the right thing. But I think everybody's right thing is different. And I think organizations, you can see it now in the marketplace. You can see organizations that have, they've got really, really high aspirations of themselves in terms of ethics and ethical trade. And you've got businesses that are really proactively reinvesting profit back into their supply chain and into the kind of the production of the raw materials that make the goods that they sell. And that for them, that's their definition of ethical trade. And other companies, it's about making sure we don't break the law and do any harm. And both of those are fine, but just do the right thing. It's that simple.
The right thing. Wow, that sounds so simple and yet so difficult for so many people.
Yeah.
Again, I think the cultural thing has such a big impact on that, right? Like from me to you, like something that I might find offensive, you might not find offensive.
No, that's right.
Right? That's what it comes back to. So I think it's good that at least globally.
It is right. And it's like I said right at the beginning, this is all about people.
Yeah.
The product is obviously very important because that's what the transaction's based on.
Yeah.
But trust is built between people, not between a person and a product. It's between sure, they like a product and they buy it, but it's almost always backed by a brand that they can identify with, that they trust, that they know, and that they share values with. And that's what it's about.
Absolutely. I know this isn't an easy topic, but one that we definitely need to recognize. So most countries have laws which prohibit things like forced labor and modern slavery and seek to protect people's basic human rights. In developed countries, this may create a perception that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Or at least that we're not involved with it.
Yeah.
But that simply isn't true. So let's talk a little bit about some modern examples of how slave labor works in both developing and developed countries.
Yeah. So you're right. It's the terminology is something that makes us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Slavery brings up certain images and feelings.
It was hard to even read that question, to be honest. It's awkward.
And it should be. It should
right.
be. It needs to be, because we have to have the discussion, and we have to make people aware that this is happening in your own backyard. We talk about this in the setting that I'm from in the United Kingdom and where I'm working now.
Yeah.
And I think at a surface level, everybody is offended by the concept of slavery, and everybody is sort of they react to it.
Yes.
But I think it's more at a sort of a intuitive level. It's more like, I don't like that, but it doesn't really happen here. So it's not affecting me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to actually start saying, in the context of the United Kingdom, there's a lot of car washes is a great example where, you've got a group of 5, 6, 7 men that have rented a kind of a car wash facility, and they run this thing, and they're there, they're there for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week type thing. And you start looking at these guys and thinking to yourself, hang on, there doesn't seem to be a break in shift here. I've seen the same guy at the car wash. Now that's sort of not even a mile away from where I live. And that's it. It's in your face. And the problem that you've got is that it's not as overt as it should be. So,
Mm-hmm.
but we do need to start educating people and saying these are some of the indicators that you should start looking for. These are some of the groups of vulnerable individuals. This is where you would typically find it. This is what it could look like. This is how those people end up in those situations. And more importantly, so right now I'm aware of the issue. Awareness is one thing, action's the other.
Yeah.
What do I do about it now? And start educating consumers and saying to people, listen, we're all people. We should all share a basic sense of what's right and what's wrong. And we should all react the same way when something goes wrong. But a lot of people, A, they don't know it's happening, and B, when they find out, they don't really know what to do. So I think part of what we need to do is that education process.
So what are the main principles in like the BRCGS ethical trade and responsible sourcing program?
So I guess the way we started with the standard is we started sort of with a goal in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, what do we want to try and achieve with this? What is the outcome that we're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've done that, it's kind of saying, right, so what are the principles that are consistent with achieving that goal? What would we need to do? What are the steps that we would need to be taking to get ourselves from point A to point B, to use the journey analogy earlier? And our 6 principles were, the first one is senior management commitment.
Mm-hmm.
You simply can do nothing without the buy-in of the boss. The person that signs the checks and has the access to the wallet, they've got to be behind this 100%. This has to be led from the front.
Yep.
So senior management commitment is really key. Behind that, we're saying, is the company capable, and do they have the capacity to be able to manage themselves properly? And that's all about management systems.
Yes.
So that's all about the ability to plan, do, check, act, and the resources that surround that.
Mm-hmm.
Moving from there, we move on to labor standards, and we're saying, are the labor standards fair and equitable in the workplace? Are they legal to start with? And we've got a range of criteria within labor standards that we'll look at. The 4th principle is the health, safety, and welfare of the individuals. Is the business taking care of that?
Mm-hmm.
5 is something which is quite new to these standards, but becoming increasingly important, and that's that basic human rights are upheld and protected. And interestingly, we start saying it's not just the basic human rights and interests of your workers, but also within your supply chain. Are you knowingly having any negative impact on human rights within the supply chain?
Right.
So we're starting to look at that long tail of the supply chain then and create awareness to start with. And then the last principle is business ethics and integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And we're saying, are you running your business properly? And that deals with things like anti-bribery and corruption, information security, and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's look at these principles a little bit more closely.
Mm-hmm.
I know that child labor is something that is given as an example. And one thing that, again, I can't wrap my head around is that most legislation, at least in the Western world, forbids it. So how does that really come into play in the standard?
Yeah. So child labor is an interesting one. It's for obvious reasons, it's really emotive.
Yeah.
It's if you're going to write a headline as an NGO or as an activist or an investigative journalist, child labor is kind of one of your go-to things. Purely because it's kind of it does get the response that it gets. But the one thing I would say is context is sometimes as important as content. By context, I mean you've got families that farm as a unit in parts of the world. The family unit is dependent on the income that's that's brought in by the child that does the work on the farm.
Yeah.
We must remember that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if we now outlaw that, what problems are we creating for the family unit in terms of the revenue that they're used to getting? It's not as easy as saying we are going to outlaw child labor. But the problem that you've got is that sometimes the person that's doing the purchase in the Western world, or the developed country, let's call it, that person doesn't always have access to the context of the situation. They just see the headline screaming, did you know the children are used to pick the cocoa that's in this chocolate?
Right.
And there's no context provided behind that. And sometimes, not always, sometimes that context is important.
Yeah.
Because if we, what's the corrective action for no child labor? Well, let's get rid of the children in the value chain. But what knock-on effect is there? What are we causing? What are the deep? And so this is something that we have to take a long-term view on. It's something that we have to agree is not right as that sort of point of destination. But we can't have a knee-jerk reaction and say, if we find it, we're going to get rid of it. Even in many, many legal contexts, they talk about a law that talks about the best interests of the child. Mm-hmm. And we're saying if it's in the best interest of the child to make sure that they're still able to earn something and provide for their family, let's find a way for them to be able to continue to do that. But they still have access to schooling. They still have access to the necessary healthcare. They're still looked after in the context of what we would expect to be acceptable. But I think at the moment, sometimes our approach is a bit black and white. It's a bit cut and dry, and it just says no child labor, therefore you're bad. Not always the case.
Okay. I think that's a good way to make that distinction. Again, that comes back to culture.
Yeah.
Because maybe in that context, it's kind of seen as household chores for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that does make sense. Would you say that with some of the supply chains, or us in the Western world, are we funding some unintentional negative activity?
It's a loaded question. There is an adage in fraud detection which says follow the money.
Okay.
So you just follow the trail of money from where it is at its most, which is point of sale, and you follow that down back through the supply chain. Our issue at the moment is that we lose sight of that at some point because we don't have that transparency, that connection with the bigger supply chain. And this is why I'm saying if we're going to manage these risks, we have to know about them. I can't manage what I can't see. And so it would be unfair as an arbitrary statement to say, yes, you're funding all of these bad things, because I think there has to be intent for it to be wrong, right? I mean, you have to know that you're doing it. And I think if the consumer doesn't know, it's unfair to target them.
Yeah.
I think what does happen, though, is that the focus of the action, the activism, is on where it can have the biggest impact. They're not going to go and, sort of create awareness at point of production because they know it's going on. Where they'll get their biggest sort of response is at point of sale, where the person that's buying the product in the developed world is outraged and shocked and horrified about what they're reading about.
Yeah.
And that then does cause a chain reaction. Are we funding it from the West and driving the bad practices in the East? Empirically, probably yes. But I think there's a lot more to it than just that. I mean, there's a lot of bad things that happen in other places that have nothing to do with the kind of the transaction and the supply chain. I do think that we need to take our heads out the sand, though, and start saying, let's have the wider conversation and start, as uncomfortable as it may be, let's start uncovering the truth, because if I can measure it, I can improve it. I'm not saying to anyone, you're bad. I'm saying you're bad as long as you know there's a problem and do nothing about it.
Sure.
But part of being bad is not even wanting to know there's a problem. And I think that's
the difference.
Yeah.
I think the common narrative that we're very familiar with is, consumers have a need. Brand owners try to meet their costs and find it as cheaply as possible. Sure. They specify to the suppliers, if you want me to work with you, I need you to source all this stuff. And then they do what they need to do, and they're not looking at what's going on.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's three parties in there, all not aware of what's happening.
Sure.
Or maybe one party's aware of what's happening. They're like, well, I need to meet a demand, so therefore that's what this is going to be.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with the paradigm you're in. I'm a retailer. I'm a manufacturer. I have to produce as much as I can to stay in business.
Yeah.
And I may not intentionally do something wrong to do that.
Yeah.
But my focus is not there. It's here. If that makes sense. My focus is on productivity, efficiency, more for less. All of those things. Not wrongly.
Yeah.
But I may have lost sight of some important issues along the way. And all that this is starting to do is it's starting to say, hey, have you considered X, Y, and Z? A, B, and C are still really important to your business in terms of the profitability pillar.
Yeah.
But what about the people and the planet? How much attention are you giving those? And also, not within the context and confines of your own business, but what about the community you're in? A lot of companies are really great at community engagement, and they're very supportive of the communities because they recognize the value that the communities contribute. And we need to get that level of awareness further propagated around the world, because I think that drives improvement, that drives an upliftment from a social perspective.
So we've talked a lot about let's get awareness, but you have to do action. So let's talk about the action now. As a brand owner, what can you do to ensure that your materials are being ethically sourced?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it's at top level, it's probably not that difficult. At principle level, it's probably not that difficult to nail. And I'm saying, step number one, I'd create an identity for yourself.
Okay.
What's important to you?
Yeah.
What are your values? From those values come a code of conduct and says, this is how we do business. This is Mike Wilson Inc. And these are my core beliefs. I will not employ children. I will not work excessive hours. I will allow my workers to freely associate and bargain collectively. I'll keep them safe and healthy. Boom, boom, boom. Those are my values and my principles.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've got that sort of that blueprint. I'm now saying, you know what? It's that important to me that I only want to work with suppliers that share those values. So now you say, I'm taking these values and I'm saying to my suppliers, I'll only work with you if I know you and if I trust you. So it's work with suppliers that you know and trust. I've created a shared value. I'm saying this is what we're all going to work towards. I know you. I trust you. I'm going to build a relationship with you. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the globe that we live in, the economy, a lot of the transactions are spot buying, one-offs. There's no sort of strategic relationship between a supplier and the buyer. And I think we need to build that in. We need to start saying, with our suppliers, who am I going to build a long-term relationship with? Who am I going to build a sustainable relationship with that's based on knowledge and trust? And once you've done that, as an organization, you can then start saying, these are the concrete steps that you must take for me to know you. And these are the concrete steps that you need to take for me to trust you. That's the basis of our relationship going forward. That's the assurance I expect from you, because that's the assurance I'm going to pass on to my consumers. And I think once we've got that nailed down, once the brand's got that, the rest becomes operational. There's another point that I wanted to make about this very quickly. I think we need to be realistic. I think we need to know that even now, as we sit here today, there's non-compliance in our supply chain. So I think what we need to do is say, listen, I don't expect compliance from you. It's obviously embedded in our relationship. But what's more important than that right now is, number one, transparency.
Okay.
So you will let me know what's going on in your business. And number two, a commitment to continuous improvement. Because at some point, somewhere, sometime, we will find something wrong. That's okay. That's not the end of the world. What's not okay is where you know it's wrong and you refuse to do anything about it.
So it is okay as a brand owner to ask for that transparency then? Being like, I want to know.
I think they have to.
Yeah.
I think they have to. I don't see how you can build a relationship, a long-term relationship, without that level of transparency. I mean, imagine you, let's use allergens as a food safety example. Imagine you went into a restaurant and said, look, I'm allergic to dairy. Does this product have any dairy in it? I'm not telling you. It's none of your business. That's what we're talking about here.
Right.
I'm a buyer that wants to buy stuff from you. And I'm saying, look, Paula, I don't want this to be used by, I don't want children to make this. I don't want it to be, I'm not telling you where the children are used, because it's none of your business. You either buy the product or you don't. It's the same thing, isn't it?
And then you say, well, I won't then.
And you say, thank you,
Yeah.
I've got choice. I'll go and exercise it elsewhere.
No, that
But
makes
yeah, I
sense.
think it's critical that brands do start asking those questions.
Okay.
It's not easy.
No, I'm trying to put in my mind, how would I even go about asking those questions?
Yeah. It's not easy. It's about, okay, I buy from you. That's link number one.
Yeah.
Now I'm saying to you, now Paula, you're selling me bread. I want you to do exactly what I've done with you, with your flour supply and with your sugar supply and your salt supply. And they need to say, right, I need to go to my farms. You see what I'm saying? So it's this watershed. It's this creating, that's why it's called a supply chain. So we create those links of accountability.
Yeah.
And it'll take years. We probably will never even get there properly. Not in my lifetime. But I mean, if we don't start now, we'll never hope in hell to get there.
So as a supplier, how can you ensure that the materials you source for your customers are being ethically produced and not exploiting groups of people? Is it the same as the brand owners?
Exactly the same. That's why it's so simple. Buy from people you know and that you trust.
Wow.
And you can even start learning from your customer. You know, they will give you a code of conduct. The code of conduct is based on, very, very often it's based on, if it has to do with labor, it's based on the International Labor Organization's key core principles or core conventions. So you can use those same principles and kind of communicate that down your supply chain. I don't think we all have to be doing different stuff. I think we can use a lot of the same things because this is value driven, isn't it? It's not about proprietary knowledge or about doing the right thing is important wherever you are in the supply chain. So same thing, buy from people you know and trust.
Simple advice, I would think.
It is.
Can you explain the prevention of discrimination in operations? What does this look like in the supply chain?
Wow. I don't even think I'm qualified to explain that. I think it is the most difficult part of our standard, of probably any standard to measure, because discrimination, it's very closely linked to the person that's either feeling it or observing it. What's discriminatory to me may not be discriminatory to you. You might be very offended by what I do, and I might think it's perfectly normal. I think what we do need to do, though, is we have to go back to basics and say, look, so what it looks like is probably secondary to what its essence is. And its essence is, I treat you differently because of who or what you are, not because of what you're doing in the workplace. Yeah? So I will give you as a female a contract that's different to the one I'd give a male counterpart, even though you're doing the same job, not because of the job, but because of who you are.
Right, yeah.
And so we have to go back to those basics and say, treat people equally within the context of the job that they're doing. So there might be some jobs where it would be inappropriate to give it to a particular person because of their physical characteristics.
Sure.
But you would predefine that. You'd say to the person up front, listen, if you want to be able to do this job, you've got to be able to do this, be this height, pick up this weight, boom, 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 boom. I really don't care if you're black, blue, pink, male, female, binary, non-binary. It doesn't really matter to me, as long as you can do the job that the job spec is looking for. So it's about taking something that's really complex and simplifying it. But I can tell you now, from an auditing perspective, it's incredibly difficult to measure. And we do need to do work around training auditors and creating awareness ourselves about what am I looking for? What are some of the signs that will tell me there's some form of discrimination out there?
I think that's an amazing example that you chose to use of, again, it comes back to legal, not legal but not ethical.
Sure.
The concept of it's a common concept that many women are fighting, is that they're not getting the same kind of salary as their male counterparts for the same roles.
Yeah.
It's still, we see it every day. We still see it now.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that you put it in those terms, and it's definitely something that affects the supply chain.
Yeah.
Because again, it comes down to people. It's how you're treating your employees.
It's in many cases a cultural thing. The gender issue is something which has been around for millennia.
Ever.
And it's not something that we're going to fix with a standard. It's
Right.
something that's something where it's all about. It's about education. It's about saying, do you know that what you're doing is actually discriminatory?
Right.
And it might be a case of, oh, no, geez, I actually didn't know that. Or yes, and I'll always do it because that's who I am and what I am. But you got to give them the benefit of the doubt to say, but also, as we do with the rest of the content of the standard, is to say, this is what you're doing. Did you know that these are some of the benefits of not doing that? I've got a really great case study of a factory in South Africa who would not allow females to apply to become a forklift driver. It was a policy, only males could be forklift drivers. And it was, through a process of becoming aware that they sort of were, so they changed their policy. And this is, going back some years. But now when you go into that factory, it's probably 80% women forklift drivers and only 20% males. And the company they will tell you they've saved money on repair bills, they've saved money on maintenance, they've saved money on injuries and stuff, because the lady drivers drive the way they were taught to drive by the instructors, whereas the men, they get behind the wheel and it's now all about wheel spinning and doing things as fast and furiously as we possibly can. And there's a great example of we were doing something because we thought it was the right thing and we had missed out on this whole benefit.
Right.
And now just by changing the way we perceive things, the way we look at things, we've unlocked all this benefit. And there's lots of more good examples of that where, businesses stand to gain more than lose by doing the right thing.
That makes sense. Health and safety of workers versus respecting human rights. Don't these go hand in hand?
I think at principle level, they're probably similar. I think the right to be safe and healthy in the workplace is it can be equated to a basic human right. But I think the health and safety bit is a lot more regulated. So there's a lot more musts. You must do this. You must do this. That's a very sort of linear process. Human rights is a lot more involved. There's a lot more different than just the health and safety rules and regulations. And again, with health and safety, a lot of it is about physical qualities and physical values in a workplace, whereas human rights is, again, it's a softer issue and not always easy to manage.
It boggles my mind that this is a conversation we're still having in 2020. To be honest, I feel like it's been going on since, pretty much the beginning of time. And although we're getting a lot closer to meeting human rights goals, we must keep our eyes open that the problem hasn't necessarily dissipated. It's just transforming and it's moving into different things. So I think keeping an understanding of these modern definitions is so important.
I think it's it's a kind of glass half full or half empty type question where you go, we'll never get rid of it, or yes, we'll get rid of it. But I think we can never become complacent. We can never get to a point where we're saying, okay, it's good enough now. I think we've always got to strive to get better. And that's why as an organization, our standards change. Every 3 years, we release a new version of that same standard. Why? Because we've taken the learnings of the past 3 years and we're saying, how can we make good better? How can we take the standard and lift it up a notch? How can we expect more and get more from the sites that we work with? And I think that's the approach that we have to take with this kind of thing as well, is that continuous improvement can never stop.
Absolutely. And we've touched base that, consumers are becoming more educated.
Sure.
The use of social media is really big in terms of educating each other. But I think consumers are also a really big motivating factor, I think, for both brand owners and the supply chain to meet their demands. The more demanding they become, as much as the negative effect happened, they were very demanding. So they went through loops and stuff in the past, whereas now it's like, okay, well, consumers are still demanding. They're just going to be more demanding about the ethical.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big other thing to consider too. You
Look,
might as well get ahead of it.
Absolutely. Look, the customer's always king.
Yeah,
The minute you're not satisfying the demands of your customer, you're out of business. That's all a brand is. All a brand is it's a transaction basis with a customer. And the minute the brand stops appealing or stops connecting with that consumer or that customer, they lose that value. And I think they realize this, and it's about understanding and responding. And you can even flip my analogy earlier of working with suppliers that you know and trust. Is selling to customers that you know and trust.
Oh, that's true.
I know you, I know what you want, and I trust that you will continue to support me if I keep investing in the things that are important to you. So there is also that sort of a flip side conversation to have as well. But it's very much a trust relationship between the two.
It's kind of interesting that you bring that up, that ethics really is about building trust and building relationships, considering that ethics is about people and the welfare of people. It does have a lot of players in this concept, but I think that if everyone can come to the consensus to do it, it would work.
I would like to believe it would. I think it's but I think that's why it's key to put people at the middle of this.
Right.
And kind of process is important and product is important. But I think if we can use sort of that commonality, we're all people, we're all human beings. I think if we can use that as the shared, the common denominator between us all, that starts getting us some traction.
And again, I think this comes back to full circle. This is why there's a certification available. It's a starting point to build that trust.
Yeah.
It starts with brand protection. It outlines all of the steps that you need to hit to at least get the process started. And then you can go beyond that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's from an analogy point of view, it's the license disc on your car. Or the license plate, or whatever you need to be able to drive legally on the road. That's kind of the compliance piece. We still need to work on the performance of the vehicle, on the way that it operates, and the way that it moves and keeps going. But this piece, the compliance bit, is okay. You know what? And from a know and trust point of view, that's a great tick in the box for both of those boxes. Absolutely. I know you because I've got your profile from the standard, and I trust you because I can see how you compare to the requirements of the standard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's literally just like, it's a full-on, again, it is literally a certificate, but I mean, like, it's that piece of paper that you can say, here you go, I've done this, you can trust me if it's a new relationship blossoming. Sure. And I'm sure, in the future, who knows, this might become the new norm.
I hope it does.
Right?
I really think it should. I think it should become a minimum requirement for that transaction to take place.
Sad that we have to ask that, but I'm glad that is hopefully going to be the case.
Yeah, I'd like it to get to a point where
it's not a question anymore.
We say it's as important as the safety of the product.
Of course.
I mean, it's not the same thing. I'm not saying, if you use something or eat something that was made using child labor, there's nothing going to happen to you physically.
Yeah.
But I think the importance is no less than keeping the food clean and safe, or the product legal and within spec.
Mm-hmm.
I think this should become another aspect of that product specification. Is it produced responsibly, and does it meet the requirements of ethical trade? Yes, it does. Is it safe and legal? Yes, it is. Right, good to go.
How does bribery and information security come into play?
So it's so a lot of the stuff that we talk about has its basis in legislation. So it follows changes in legislation or new legislation that comes in. Anti-bribery and corruption is a new piece of not new anymore, but it came in a few years ago, and it became a requirement for businesses in certain geographies that if you wanted to trade with a company from another geography, there had to be an ABAC, an anti-bribery and corruption protocol in place, because it was that rife. It's such a big cause of actually it's unethical. So they changed the legislation and the standard, obviously, because it's measuring legal compliance. It starts saying, do you have an anti-bribery and corruption management system in place?
Yep.
What was the other one you asked? Anti-bribery and corruption and
security.
Information security. Yeah, geez, that's a minefield on its own. But there's obvious reasons for that. I mean, you don't have to look too far in the newspaper or Facebook or Google or whatever the case is to find a big social media platform who shall remain nameless, who's been fined very heavily for leaking information. So yeah, but it's key, particularly if you've got a brand that is sharing very sensitive commercial information with a supplier and vice versa.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that, hey, my information, if the whole I know you and I trust you.
Right.
Part of the trust is, listen, if I share information with you, I want you to look after it and make sure that nobody else is going to get hold of it that can do me some harm. And that's the basic principle of it. It's not we must be clear and say that our standard is not an information security standard. It really is looking at the high level and saying, as an organization, are you aware of this? Are you taking the necessary steps to make sure? Yeah. But becoming increasingly important as we move on to increasingly cloud-based systems, and everything's done over the net, and data is becoming really a key transaction. It's becoming currency in many contexts. So yeah.
I'm going to ask a question that I think is on probably a lot of people's minds. As much as this all seems fantastic in theory, it sounds costly. What, at the end of the day, is the value here?
I think my question in response to that would be, I can probably work out quite accurately what the cost of doing this will be.
Mm-hmm.
My question would be, what would the cost of not doing it be? And sometimes that's the conversation that we need to have. So I can tell you exactly what costs are going to be involved in this. What I cannot tell you is the cost to your business if you don't do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's on the defensive side. On the offensive side, I'm saying I can point you to companies that are doing the right thing. I wouldn't name them now, but I can name brands that I think are amazing.
Yeah.
That are doing really, really well.
Yeah. Successfully
financially, and they are reinvesting heaps of money back into their people, back into the planet, back into the 3 pillars of sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
Surely that's a good business case. So I'm saying, listen, yes, there is going to be a cost, number one, but we can work that out.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what the cost of not doing something is going to be.
Yeah.
But number two, I bet you any money that if you did the right thing, you'd start seeing better productivity with your workers, more engaged workforce, lower absenteeism, less accidents on the shop floor. Your turnover of your staff is going to be less. Every single one of the 5 things I've just mentioned is costing you money right now because you're not doing the right thing.
Right.
All of the laws that are in the standard, all of the ILO conventions, it's all come from human experience of being mistreated. We're saying, why is 48 hours being unreasonable? Because people need to go back home to their families. There's a human aspect to this. It's not just some arbitrary number. Why do people need to get a living wage? Well, go figure. They need money to live on. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, we're saying...
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because it sounds ridiculous when you put it that way, but it's the truth.
It is.
Yeah.
I think what does happen is, if you remember, I said stuff gets lost in translation.
Yeah.
And sometimes the expectations are miscommunicated. So as a supplier, what I think I have to do is not the same as what I actually have to do, number one. And number two, I'm seeing a lot of the stuff for the first time in somebody else's format. It's an outside-in transaction, whereas actually I'm doing a lot of the stuff already. I just don't call it that or that, and I don't do it like that and that. I call it this and this, and I do it like this and this, but it's the same thing.
Right.
And I think once people realize, hey, actually, I'm pretty much doing all of this, it starts becoming an easier. But that, again, I go back to the first thing I've always said, and throughout the process, create awareness. Work with suppliers that you know and who know you.
Yeah.
Create that awareness,
and
and then build trust. Take action, build trust, and start implementing where you need to. Most of the businesses that we deal with are doing a lot of this. A lot of them, they're blindsided when we do the audit because they're going, crumbs, I didn't even know that was a thing. Or the management system that they've got is ineffective in some way. They benefit from having the opportunity to correct that. We're not coming along with a big stick and saying, if you get it wrong, we're going to beat you.
Yeah.
We're coming along and saying, here's an opportunity for you to improve your business, and in so doing, you will see the benefits and the rewards. I think it has to be more carrot and less stick if we're going to get it right.
How does BRCGS support sites that want to optimize their responsible sourcing management systems?
So we do it through a range of ways. Obviously, the standard is one of the ways that we do that. We give them the playbook. We say, this is what ethical trade and responsible sourcing looks like. You will need to be able to demonstrate that you're doing all this to be able to convince your customers that they can trust you. Okay, so that's one way that we do it. Around that, though, we try and learn as much as we can from the audits that we undertake. So it's not a case of, okay, we've done all these audits and you kind of load them onto the directory and hand out certificates. We're saying, what are these audits telling us? Are the suppliers understanding the requirements of the standard? And the response to that is a development of a training intervention that says, how can we either build awareness around this, or how can we improve performance? How can we help sites get better? The thing with the ethical trade and responsible sourcing standard is that it's got so many tentacles and it goes into so many different areas. You spoke about health and safety. We spoke about earning living wages and managing the payment of wages. We spoke about working hours and the importance of that. We haven't touched on freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining, but there's a really, really, really important part of workplace relationships. Sorry.
So important. He hits his mic.
It is. We haven't even touched on that.
Right.
But there is an opportunity where we can start engaging with sites that use our standards to say, number one, do you know what the value of having that workplace communication is?
Mm-hmm.
And number two, let's show you how you can get the most out of it. And start developing material, start giving them access through BRC, participate to literature that they can go and read and learn from, and really creating that service pack of value.
Yeah.
That we're not just a certification standard.
Yeah.
We want to help you not only get to where you need to be, but stay there and move beyond that. And that's why we do have a range of services within the annual service pack that our sites receive.
So how would someone get started?
Look, if they've already got an engagement with a certification body, that's a way that they can find out more. But we've got a website that the folks can go on. They can have a look at our materials on the website.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, it's all about people. So pick up the phone someone in the office, and have a chat and find out more about the organization. We think this is important enough to invest in and kind of get behind and build. But we can't do it without the support and the uptake of our key stakeholders out there. So our encouragement to all of the people that are listening and starting to think about this, it's great. We may not have answered all your questions, but if we've created one question in your mind, that's mission accomplished. Ask it. Get in touch with us.
And if you do have any questions about today's podcast, by all means, email us at podcast@brcgs.com, and we're happy to answer it. If you do come visit our website and you want to check out the standard that Mike and I have been talking about, you can certainly visit at www.brcgs.com. Take a look at the bookshop. You could also email us at contactus@brcgs.com to talk to a salesperson, as Mike has suggested. Do you have any other things that you want to add, Mike, just to kind of finish us off?
I think I've said it all. I think it's just get interested, get aware, and ask questions. We're learning all the time, and we encourage other people to learn with us and help be part of the solution rather than just the one banging the drum about the problem.
That sounds good. All right. Thanks so much for joining me today, Mike.
You.
I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Let's use science for a safer world, and thanks for joining us at Confidently Compliant, a food safety podcast.